was always this debate, and it's always an ongoing debate, is do we invoke treaties when we're in court? Well, I'll tell you, one of the areas that I don't have any reservations, no pun intended, about raising controversies. I'm not a fan of these of what people call Indian treaties. I don't think there are any. They were all written by white men. We didn't write a single one of them. And even the ones that they want to call, like when the people refer to the Tooral Wampum Treaty, it's not really a treaty. It's a pretty loose agreement. And I'll talk about that perhaps a little bit later. But all of these treaties, and the one that people refer to as the seminal treaty of the Six Nations, the Canandaigua Treaty, that's the worst piece of crap out of all of them. I mean, it's 7 articles long. No Mohawks were even at the table. Oh, I'll take it back. Aaron Hill was there, but refused and actually rejected out of hand. Aaron Hill was he sat. I don't know which Mohawk title he sat in, but he was one of the Mohawk titles that heard the pitch. So they call it a treaty with the Six Nations, and they got like 40 or 50 X's on a paper with all these names, and almost all of them are Senecas. And the Senecas don't have that many titles. There's only eight titles within the Seneca Nation. So those other 40 or so names on there. And of course, on those names were guys like Red Jacket, Corn Planter, and Handsome Lake. And the irony is that some of those guys could read and write, and yet still there's only an X on the paper. Which, if you can figure that one out, maybe explain it to me. But the Canandaigua Treaty is only 7 articles long. The 7th article is a roadmap for how we resolve conflicts with each other. If you commit a crime against our people, we will petition the authorities within, the President of the United States or whatever, to make sure that justice is imposed upon you. If I commit a crime against you, then you would petition, and that's what Article 7 says. And it's real clear. And then it says, this shall be the way it is until another equitable solution is passed through the great legislature. Now, that's the way it's written on the Canandaigua Treaty. That's not the way it was written. The way it was presented to us is, this is what we're going to do. We're going to do this until we come up with, unless we have a better plan. There's nothing equitable about passing US 232 and 233 and saying, okay, now we're going to give criminal jurisdiction to the state or whatever else. That's not equitable. We weren't a part of that conversation. So we had Article 7 of the Canandaigua Treaty clearly lays out how there's going to be respect of each other's sovereignty, even as it relates to how we resolve conflict should a conflict ensue. And this was considered, they actually called this the riot provision. It was an attempt to prevent violence from escalating from native to non-native. Now the other 6 articles, most of them had to do with these lines on a map about all the land the United States was going to claim from Senecas and from others. But what it carved out, and it said 3 times in this treaty, and you can find it, and it's all online, 3 times the same expression is said, and it says, the United States recognizes that our land is ours, and that they will never claim the same. Until such time as we decide to sell, which they have the right to buy, and that kind of stuff. But what it says is, they recognize that we own our land. Not that we have a right to occupancy, that we own it. And that the United States will never claim it. They will never claim our land. It says it 3 times. Now, never is never. I mean, unless it means something else. But apparently it meant something else when it's written on a paper. We fight with New York State about jurisdiction on our land. If the United States clearly says in 1794 they will never claim the land that we retain. Now, they are saying that we can still sell land to them. Of course we could, right? But it is very clear that the land that remains ours, that we retain, the United States will never claim the same. So every November 11th, in the middle of our special month, when people go to Canandaigua and pose for pictures with state and federal politicians and march down the Canandaigua town square and have a buffet at the town hall and get to look at one of the only two original copies of the Canandaigua Treaty behind glass that's held there and have their kumbaya moment. I'm not going to be there. And I told everybody, invite me there to speak and I'll go. But I'm not going to tell you how great this treaty is. And until Canandaigua Treaty Day is a day of protest, and it's a day of demonstration, it is not a day of celebration. To me, Canandaigua Treaty Day is just as crappy a holiday, which it happens to fall on Veterans Day this year, which is another issue. It's just as bad a holiday as Columbus Day. It is a terrible treaty, and I challenge anybody to read it. And there is another provision in there that says every year there will be a payment made by the United States to the Six Nations, and that payment will be for livestock, farm equipment, machinery, tools, utensils, and cloth. It's $4,500 in 1794. It's $4,500 in 2013 too. $4,500. There's about 100,000 Haudenosaunee, that the United States recognizes. So that's about 4.5 cents worth of cloth every year. And there's and it used to be a woman, so I don't want to sound sexist, but there's a woman in D.C. whose job it is every year to buy $4,500 for the cloth. And I mean to tell you, there are some of the people in our territories, Joey, I know you know some of them, who treat this treaty cloth like it's the Shroud of Turin. I swear, they treat this thing like, oh, it's so sacred. No, it's not sacred. It's insulting. Because they never, and there are huge periods of time that not even that $4,500 ever got spent. But again, there was no cost of living increase on that $4,500. So so we have some people who say, oh, the United States, they still honor that treaty. They still send that treaty cloth every year. Yeah, but what about the never gonna claim our land thing? That was a bigger deal to me than the $4,500 for the cloth. So, yeah, I ruffle a few feathers, especially when I poke fun at treaty cloth. I do poke fun at treaty cloth. And there are some people, especially old timers, who really, Joe, you can imagine how sentimental some people get over that kind of thing. But I'm going to do it because I want people, and if they don't like my sarcasm and and the fact that I make light of it or worse, then let's have a conversation about it. And who knows? Maybe we could do something with that cloth. I don't know. I don't know what you can do with 4.5 cents worth of cloth, but I don't know. But so, well, and the thing is, obviously it doesn't get distributed amongst 100,000 Haudenosaunee. It turns into this whole thing about who are the special families that'll get larger bolts of it, and so they can make their ribbon shirts or whatever else. And it's crappy cloth. I mean, it's not like it's special. The only thing that's special about it is that it's treaty cloth. Anyway, that's my view. And I mean to tell you, all of the treaties are crappy. I mean, and Canandaigua was, came after Stanwix and Schuyler and Harmer. I mean, and every one of those was willing. In the Mohawk word for treaty means we give up our land. That's what it literally translates to, because that's what it always was. But even when we didn't give up our land, it is treated as if it was. I mean, the Senecas went through this in the 90s, renegotiating or trying to do a settlement act on the Salamanca lease. There were leases that the United States and New York State and these land companies approved. Not just 99-year leases. Can you imagine a 999-year lease? And then, of course, what our people are told is, oh, no, the land's yours. No, it's yours. We're just going to use it. And you sign this paper and it says we can use it for 999 years. And so our people get lured into this thing, and then if it's not, when the leases weren't paid for, which they never were, after a fashion, we had no recourse to do anything about it. That Article 7 of the Canandaigua Treaty, that kind of stuff being recognized almost immediately. And we didn't have what you would call legal standing to bring a case into court. That's part of what that Jake Thompson did with the Oneida Land Claims. He created a vehicle that allowed, a vehicle to have standing in the court. Now, you can make an argument either way whether having a standing in court has played very well for us, and I'll kind of mention something about that. In 2010, Ross John and I went down to Washington, D.C. for a series of meetings they called the State Department Consultation on the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. In 2007, the world passed the UN DRIP, the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. It passed by a huge majority. There were several abstentions, and there were 4 no votes. Canada, the United States, Australia, and New Zealand. Those are the 4 countries that voted against it. Not just abstained, they voted against it, and that was in 2007. But regardless, it passed. Now, but it still hangs out that you've got 4 countries that actually voted against, and there's nothing new in the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. It's the same document, essentially, as the Declaration of Human Rights, which was passed in the 50s, I think. So, I mean, it's the same document. It's just that there's a few other, you know, the biggest change in it is this notion of free, prior, and informed consent for things that are being done to us. Imagine that, how novel an idea that we would actually have to agree to things like giving up our land or having resources extracted from them, or Kinzua Dam, grabbing up 10,000 acres of Seneca land, or however many acres got grabbed up for the reservoir in Tuscarora. Imagine that we would actually have, that somebody would suggest, the international community would suggest that we should have some, like, consent should be an issue. So we went down to this consultation, and the first day was just tribal leadership, and frankly, it was a full day of bullshit. There was more talk in that day about honoring sacred sites than anything else. Here you've got so-called leadership sitting there. I looked at the Haudenosaunee delegation sitting right beside the State Department. There they were. The Onondagas, the Tonawondas, the Cayugas, they're all sitting right there, right beside the State Department. Hillary Clinton wasn't there, but right beside the State Department. Not once. Now, and keep in mind, this is 2010. And this was in August. And the significance of that will come up a little bit later. But so nothing got mentioned about any other Haudenosaunee issues. In fact, Darwin Hill just stood up and bragged about how hard they worked on the UN DRIP and basically taking credit for all the good work that was done there. So that's what was discussed day 1. Second day was the NGO day. That means the rest of us could speak, and I spoke. They had a microphone, and I gravitate to microphones, so I spoke, and frankly, I spoke for way longer than they wanted me to speak. I spoke for about 45 minutes straight. They wanted somebody to go to a microphone and ask a question. I didn't ask a question. I gave testimony, and nobody shut me up. They had all of the agencies up on the stage. This is at the National Native American Museum, NMA, National Museum of the American Indian, part of the Smithsonian. They're all up on the stage, all the agencies, DOE, DOT, Defense Department, Interior Department, Treasury Department, Department of Homeland Security, State Department. They're all up there, right? And I just ripped into every one of them. Everything from draft registration to taxation to, DEC was up there, EPA, and environmental issues. But I also talked about this travel document bullshit that is being imposed upon everybody, but it's particularly a problem for those of us. I'm a Mohawk from Ganawage, which is on the Canadian side, so it presents a real problem for any of us Haudenosaunee that travel. Somebody put a border between our communities. I mean, Akwesasne has a border through the middle of the community. Cornwall Island is considered Ontario, Snai is considered Quebec, and the rest of St. Regis is considered New York. It's all Akwesasne as far as and yet they got borders to it. They got provincial borders, international borders, but we didn't put them there. So this travel issue is a big deal. So I raised the issue associated not only with their enhanced tribal cards that they're trying to pitch, but the Haudenosaunee passports. A week later is when the debacle about the Iroquois Nationals made national news, that they weren't allowed to go play in the World Cup for lacrosse in Manchester, England. A week later. Again, those guys sat right there beside the State Department. Perfect audience, perfect opportunity. That issue could have been started then, but instead, a little over a week later is when it turns into this debacle. which it still isn't resolved today. We still don't have our Haudenosaunee passports recognized by the United States. And again, that whole thing, it starts with Great Britain, who did sign the UN DRIP. They did sign. They're one of the nations that approved it, and yet they're the ones who rejected letting the Iroquois nationals come to the. And why? They said, well, if the United States doesn't recognize their passports, how do we know they're going to let them back in the country? And of course, anytime that we've ever traveled, and I've never done it, but every time our people have ever traveled on a Haudenosaunee passport, we've said, don't worry, they're not going to keep us out of the United States. That's never an argument for us, but that's what the countries who receive us always say, wow, we don't know they're going to. So this big argument ensues about whether, and we've been traveling on these Haudenosaunee passports for years, but that was an issue that I brought up. In fact, I was the only person that brought it up in my 45-minute rant to everybody on the stage. But the other thing that kept coming up, and it happened in day one and day two of this thing, was the conversation about, because one of the things I asked early on was, what was the main reason offered up, because it wasn't talked about right away, why the United States rejected it in 2007. Somebody right there was right on the spot with the report that was issued by the State Department, why they rejected it. And what was clear was they rejected it because their concern was how much this UN DRIP would reshape international law. And would it undermine what the United States called its current remedy for conflict with Native people? And I said, what is this current remedy? You mentioned it several times here in 2 days. What are you calling your current remedy? And they said, well, court. I said, so you're suggesting that the only remedy the United States has is court? So us entering into your jurisdiction, most of our arguments are issues of sovereignty. By definition, a sovereign cannot have a fair trial in a court that is only that can only rule on issues of their own constitution. And if your constitution doesn't cover us, which it clearly didn't and doesn't, then how can your courts be the remedy? I said the remedy is what we're doing here, is talking. The remedy is statesmanship. The remedy is what our relationship was really built upon in the first place, which was enough respect to be able to have a conversation. Now, I'm not saying that we weren't always double-dealed with all along the way. George Washington was selling off military tracts of native land, all the while telling our people how protected our land was going to be. So we were being cheated, right from the start.